Welcome to Making Sense of AI, where we unravel the complexities of artificial intelligence, exploring its profound impact on our world. In each episode, we delve into the tension and promise of this transformative technology, seeking to uncover how AI is reshaping ethics, business, education, and beyond. Join us as we navigate the challenges and opportunities of the AI revolution, offering a hopeful vision for the future, brought to you by Turner and Binova AI. Today, I am joined by Ewoud de Kok, CEO and co-founder of Feedback Fruits. Starting as a student member of the Dutch National Accreditation Committee at TU Delft, Ewoud co-founded Feedback Fruits in 2012 to enhance educational interactivity. Today, Feedback Fruits collaborates with over 100 institutions worldwide, including 20% of the top 100 universities. Ewoud also serves on the boards of EdTech Europe and the Dutch EdTech Foundation, and he leads the Trust Framework Initiative for Ethical EdTech Practices. Join us to uncover the latest trends and innovations in education. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Ewoud to the show.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, and also thank you very much for that great introduction.
Pleasure. So I think what I'd love to get started with you on today is a little bit about your journey and why and how did you become such a success story in the education space?
Thank you. So the start of this all was at the Technical University in Delft, which is in the Netherlands. And in Delft, I was studying climate change because I was determined to start a climate tech company. So I studied specifically sustainable energy technology at physics. While I was taking that study, I saw this video of Carl Sagan, who briefed the United States Congress on the exact fundamentals, the exact physics behind climate change. That video struck me because that was 40 years ago and nothing changed. So I wondered, how had we not been able to act, consider the fact that we were aware of this problem? And that led me to understand the power of education, but also the responsibility of education. And in our democratic societies, we rely on the wisdom of the crowd. And for the wisdom of the crowd to function well, everyone needs to have access to high quality education, but also needs to be educated at a high quality. And then I realized that there is a scalability issue in education that hampers this from happening. And to give you a bit more color to that context, I was studying two courses at the same time. One course was wind turbines, and the other course was the physics behind solar cells. And that wind turbine course was a traditional course where more than 200 students, or I think it was 120 at the time, would go to class, had to do some homework and an exam at the end. There was this other course, solar cells, and solar cells was organized different. Used to flipping the classroom model, and it was extremely full of what I call learning energies. Everyone is engaged. Everyone was asking questions. This was the course that I had expected actually all courses to be in higher education. And the important takeaway also is that course was, one, very engaging, but two, I can still recall the exact physics behind solar cells. A different topic, but else I would explain it because it's quite interesting. I wouldn't be able to do this for wind turbines. That course was much more effective. So I went to the professor. I asked the professor, Miro Zeeman, Miro, what did you do to get this course like this? Question one. Two, why are your colleagues not doing this? Question one, he answered the flipping the classroom model on a way of basically a different pedagogy. Indeed, active learning, as you mentioned. Okay, great. Well, then if we know that that works, why are your colleagues not doing this? Well, he said, because when I had to start this course at the beginning of the semester, I went to my family to tell them that I will work on Saturday in order to organize this course properly. Because it's really hard to organize these methods at scale. And there, the idea of what Feedback Fruits is today was built. And it's basically making it easy for educators, or make better teaching easy to organize. And we can use technology for that. And there's a couple of first order principle lessons that I learned then. I wasn't aware at the time that I learned them. Later down the line, when growing the company, I realized how important they were. But one of them was what I call pedagogy over technology. So there's this tendency, if there's tech, and now also with AI, right? To jump on the technology first. That's the shiny thing, right? That's the new kid on the block. You want to understand this. So it's a tech conversation. But tech itself is neutral, also AI. Well, if you would start from scratch, it's neutral. But how you apply it, that is basically where craftsmanship comes in. So we should always consider application, just the goal. What is it that we try to achieve first before we actually start talking about technology? And that is hard to do because it's counterintuitive. But anyway, pedagogy of technology, that was one of the first order principles that I learned there. Then another one was the following. I thought, I'm going to try to tackle this challenge. So I went to interview, I think, 10 different teachers to tell them about flipping the classroom and how they liked it and what they thought about it and if they would use it if it was easy to organize. And I realized that all these 10 different teachers had a different perspective on what they thought the right pedagogy and the right active learning was for that class. So I recall wondering with my CTO at the time, how are we going to build one product that satisfied the needs of all of them? And then I realized we shouldn't, because in education, this was that second first one principle that I learned, autonomy is extremely important. The autonomy of the educator, the autonomy of the institution to choose what and how things are being educated and taught, so to say, in formal education at least. And that lesson is also something that I still hold very close to me.
I can imagine. And I think one of the main things that people forget is that before you apply any kind of tech, you need process and you need steps. And that's really where that critical thinking idea comes in. How do we critically analyze which steps, tasks are the most important, which we can automate, augment, or alter with whether it's AI or another technology? So one thing that I've experienced working in this space is the difficulty of, building the product is one thing. We interview our target audience. We sit with faculty. We sit with students. Sounds like you did the same. But where the challenges also arise are around that step towards implementation. I think this is deeply cultural. Perhaps in the Netherlands, it's related more to a, doe maar normaal, dan doe je al gek genoeg, which translates roughly in English to don't act too crazy. It's kind of a weird way of stopping innovation in its tracks. What would you say to that, Ewoud? Because ultimately building a product is one thing, requires a huge amount of knowledge, understanding, and being able to exactly translate a process into a product that people want to use. But what about the step towards implementation?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think it depends on what implementation step you take. The two key implementation steps that are required for us to be successful is the actual adoption of these improved pedagogies supported by technology, right, by the educator. That's one. But I think a lot has been written already about that because this follows a bit more of a standard adoption implementation process, like innovation adoption cycle. So I don't think there's a novelty that I can share on that implementation phase. But there is another hidden one, which you only sort of discover after a lot of blood, sweat, and tears working in EdTech. And that is the implementation at an institution. For us to be successful, we have to get an institution adopt this technology. And that adoption process, there's not a lot written about. You need to discover it's actually not very accessible. Here, the purchasing systems and implementation systems work, I would say, almost 180 degrees against the benefit of the institution. And that is, as an EdTech entrepreneur, small one, almost impossible to sell to an institution. And that is your entry point often for technology get adopted. There is a way around it, which is sometimes used, right? That you would right away sell technology to a teacher, but often teachers don't have budget. Or the other option would be you sell the technology, you let the teacher adopt the technology in their class, and then that students pay for it. It sounds very unethical, but that is something we do already for 200 years with publishers, right? Teacher says, hey, go and buy this book, and students need to buy the book in order to finish the course. Mm-hmm. I choose not to do that because it doesn't feel right to me. It decreases accessibility for education. So we choose to go the hard way, selling to an institution, and that is extremely hard, as I said. And Third way would be giving your technology away for free. But if the technology is for free, you are the product, right? So those type of products are not allowed in institutions for a good reason. Definitely not in Europe because of privacy and security problems. But the option that we only had left was actually going for the implementation phase through an institution. And that is a terrifying process. It's something that's very hard to understand and basically kills innovation. And by killing innovation, you don't let newcomers join the ecosystem. And because you do that, the existing players in the ecosystem can be extremely dominant. And these players have legacy technology. There's no incentive to improve it. And they're misusing that vendor lock-in. But that vendor lock-in is not something that they created. It's something that the system allows for because it's so hard to access for smaller companies. So that's from a system perspective, I think. If we would solve that problem, so basically how tech get purchased at institutions, then we could create more accessibility and more market dynamics, which would really help a lot. Mm-hmm. But then there's also another friction point. And that is an interesting one because that friction point in this implementation process is not necessarily a legal process, like tendering is, but it's more of a cultural process. And that cultural component has to do with the following reflection. Like education is a public good, at least in Europe, and to a big extent also in the US. And it's a huge sector, right? So just there's a lot of money being spent on education, more money than there is on, well, a lot of other industries, including fintech. But it's a public money, right? It's public money spent on public organizations. There's not so much private components in that industry, except for the publishers that I was just already referring to. This means that, and I think this is also for a good reason, and don't get me wrong, but if you want to improve teaching and learning, then often you need to innovate. And public institutions, especially educational institutions, are great at continuing their own legacy for the coming year. They've done it for 200 years and even longer. So they are designed for resilience, not designed for change. So these institutions getting innovation off the ground and implement it themselves was extremely hard. So that's, I think, the power of private companies. But then if you get private companies working closer to education, you have a cultural difference. Because the people that work in education, they do this because for the greater public good. And entrepreneurs also are shareholders and also therefore add another reason and that drives them, namely profit. And that is something that goes against the culture of education. So that friction creates a lot of distance and makes it next to and makes also people hide behind processes. And then the sort of the thing that I still have troubles with today is people don't really mind spending a lot of money on very big, almost anonymous organizations, right? Because that's just how it always has gone. But when there's a small entrepreneur that needs a tenth or even a lower percentage, right? That tries to really solve the problem through innovation, right? That you try to address. Then all of a sudden there's this human connection, but then the humans are misaligned, partly misaligned, right? Because of what I just described. And that creates a distance. Sorry for describing it this way, but I think it's important for us to realize that that is the dynamic. And that dynamic makes it very hard for basically companies and private initiatives to help in the transformation of teaching and learning, while we know that those are the ones we require for this transformation. So I see those two obstacles when it comes to implementation, with the first phase of implementation, and that is actually acquisition, right, of the technology. Then after you did the acquisition, it actually becomes much easier. Because once it's, there's one, I would say, important component of implementation after the acquisition, so basically after the institution acquired or bought specific technology, namely very proper integration into the existing ecosystem. And this is, I think, entrepreneurs, especially startup entrepreneurs and scale-up entrepreneurs, tend to sometimes forget that there's more than only their company, right? Because they are they live and breathe their product, they live and breathe their company. That's the thing that is so important. But in reality, it's a very small thing, right? Element of a much bigger picture. And in order to be successful, you need to make sure that you very properly integrate into the already existing ecosystem, significantly reducing the implementation friction. So this is also one of the reasons why I joined the One EdTech board, European One EdTech board, right? That's the standard body behind what we so-called interoperability standards, or those are basically API descriptions, how APIs should function in order for technology to properly, be able to communicate. And that's required for that integration to happen properly. So that is another very important success factor for implementation. And then the last one is, again, autonomy. I think it's very important, especially at research institutions. The autonomy of teachers is so high that the only reason for people to adopt is intrinsically motivated. It's not because they have to. That means that your solution needs to trigger intrinsic motivation, right? And this can be done through standard vitamins and painkillers. Considering where education is today and the amount of burden you have for educators, I think it doesn't really make sense to focus too much on vitamins from an implementation perspective. You rather focus on painkillers because there's intrinsic motivation for painkillers, right? There's only intrinsic motivation for vitamins when you have the headspace to actually think about vitamins. And we made that mistake a lot because we still do, I would say, because we focus ourselves on making better teaching easy to organize. But most teachers are still in the mindset of, how do I make my existing teaching practice even easier to organize, because I just don't have the headspace to think about better yet. But I hope that gives a bit of color to the implementation question, both on institution as well as adoption, user adoption side.
100%. And I think this is something that was one of the main connection points between us at that conference as well. You know, we're talking about trying to innovate in education, but educators and technologists and even those funding, whether it's PE or VC or even a grant, all of those are just very different funding sources. So that conversation is never happening at the level for it to need to happen in order to actually see that implementation, see that scale, and see that change. So I can very much appreciate the way in which you articulate the different steps, the different phases that this entire system needs to go through in order for that change. And, you know, it was so funny, Ewoud. I was doing a talk last week and I asked the audience, there was like, even standing people in the back, and it was like a packed room. It was great. And they were all there for AI in education. They all had a lot of opinions. And I asked, how many of you have actually signed a contract with an AI solutions provider? And I don't mean, Microsoft, and I don't mean Google, because those are obviously, you're either on one of the two, which is also another conversation for another day, but nobody raised their hand. So for me, we talk a lot about artificial intelligence or innovation in education. And I know you and I are both so well versed in the conversation, but then practically nobody raises their hand when it actually comes to giving the entrepreneur space to innovate and do what they do best. So I think this is a really interesting dynamic that we're dealing with. How do you suggest that educators develop better relationships, develop a better sense and a better ability of understanding which type of technology supplier or provider they should be speaking to or looking at?
Thank you. Thank you for shining a light on this, because it's a systematic problem. A lot of talking and a lot of, talking from a high horse. May I say this correctly? Like, I'm not burning my hands because I do nothing, but I have a lot of opinion on what would look like. And if you do something wrong, I will tell you do. But I do nothing. It's a lot of that. And it's so counterproductive. It creates a culture of inaction while we require action. We also require action to continue to live by our values. And you can sit on your high horse and tell about values, but the only way to truly protect them is to be in the field, to build the greatest solutions out there based on your values, right? Because you'll lose momentum in the mid to long term, and you lose basically credibility, and you lose power to even make people care about your values. So if you are, and I think this is a systematic problem at the European level, right? I think there's a lot of jokes being made about the great AI technology being developed all around the world, and the great developments from Europe is regulation on that technology. We can still do that because we are a dominant player in the world, but we won't maintain that dominance if we completely become reliant on others. And that in a smaller scale is also the case for institutions and for educational institutions. I mean, as I said, it is a public good for a reason. There are these public values. But if there are private companies that will become so much better at delivering amazing learning experiences for students, or for basically people that come out of high school, then students will start not enrolling into the traditional education anymore. And you lost your momentum to basically act on the responsibility you have, and that is creating that wisdom of the crowd. At least that's how I look at it. It makes you a fossil, right? I'll just 50 years down the line, you're nothing anymore.
I think the 50 years is generous. I was just thinking about it this morning, just a simple example from the Netherlands. I've been living here for 2 years now, or been in and out for 2 years, basically. And so quite recently, settling in the Netherlands, and I wanted to go to the Milieu Park. For non-Dutch listeners, that's the place where you can safely dispose of different types of trash and recycling. And it's amazing, actually. I have a lot of respect for it. And it's Wednesday, May 1st today, and I looked online, and the Milieu Park is closed today. And I was like, why is it closed? Like, what, is it? So it turns out it's a public holiday. And then I think this is fantastic. It's great. And what I do love about Europe, which I was in dire need of after having worked in Dubai and San Francisco and like Lagos in Nigeria, like Sydney, like I've worked in cities around the world, and I was tired. I was ready to come to Europe, but it was almost like we don't have those 50 years, Ewoud. And it's to me, it's like we've got like 5 months. I don't want to say anything bad about it, but here's the thing: like for me, it's this entire mindset and culture shift. But I feel like you and I almost have to go back 10 steps each time and explain those steps. But by then, counterparts who are just as intelligent and just as creative and courageous as we are, I'm not saying one is better than the other. It's just this gap is getting exponentially bigger as the technology gets exponentially better.
Yes. And there's a network effect in this technology. So you could say a pessimist, or some would say a realistic view is we've already lost it because of that network effect. But okay, I mean, I am an optimist by nature, and this is why I love the subject of this podcast, because what you address is a system problem. And you basically don't blame humans. It's a result of a system and a culture to some extent, also a system. And this is also something that I found in education. When I talked to Miro Zeeman, that teacher of solar cells, but also talked to that wind turbine teacher later down the line to ask her where she was interested in using and flipping a classroom model. And what I found out, all these people are great people, right? They're, but that's a system that works against them. And I think that what you highlight very strongly, and I mean, I can still learn a lot from you also, especially from the perspectives that you bring with you, right? Is that urgency that you feel it for a reason, right? And I think that urgency is not something that a lot of people truly feel. Great. Because we got sort of used to wealth. We thought wealth and form of industrial power, economic power, and the dominance that comes with that is basically a given. Well, it's not. You need to work extremely hard for it. But what was my way to change that system problem, and what is still our way as feedback groups to change the system problem, is I am not the architect of the system, right? I'm a player in the game. I'm not setting the rules. So I need to work with those rules. Right? I do call for leadership, don't get me wrong. I do call for the European Commission. I do call for the Dutch government. And I do call to the leaders of institutions. And with that, I mean the 3 top people at the top, right? Act. You have a responsibility. Don't be blamed in 20 years down the line by having not done, or 50, whatever the scope we will take, by having done nothing right now. This is your moment to be a leader. This is why you are in this seat. No, leading is not tough. No, sometimes you need to tell the hard truth. But that is what leading is. And if you lack doing that, history will blame you for it. At least that's how strong I think about it.
I love that, actually. And I think there's nuance and there's diplomacy and there's kindness. I will never replace those three. Those are values to live by. But you're right. Like, there's a fire. It just feels a bit invisible, but it's there. So how do you do this? I really appreciated your comments at that conference when we switched from the people, take like you and the other panelists, and we switched to, I think, more audience interaction. And you did still speak a little bit about how you engage the government. And I know we will have listeners from all over the world. So I think just if you can speak to how you've made impact in the EU, I think that would also be extremely beneficial for both listeners on the side of the I'm an educator and I want to learn more, and on the side of I'm a technologist and I also want to know how to do this. So can you tell us a little bit more about how do you make that change on actually not a policy level, but a policy implementation level almost,
Yes, that's a very good question. So the context that we just sketched was a context where Europe lags behind. And that is true, especially on this field. And with Europe, we could say Europe, but in this case also education. Public education. Then I think, if I'm running a race with people and I'm behind, what do? Am I just going to continue to run behind? Or am I going to, while running, try to find a path that's quicker to my end goal? Basically change the game. And that's, I think, the opportunity that we have in Europe as well as in public education. We need to act, but that acting is not just blindly running behind where everyone is running to, right? It's defining what good and success looks like for you and then go and chase it. So I think the European way is through public-private collaboration, right? If you look at if I may put it very bluntly, right? And there's much more nuance to it and much more diplomacy to it. And I think your words were great. I respect that also. But sometimes you need to just be blunt to make the point. The American model is based on an Anglo-Saxon model, right? Free market, full free market, at least compared to the Chinese model, which is much more government sort of driven. And then you have Europe. And I think Europe should be doing both, best of both worlds. So that's what I call public-private partnerships. And I think that is something, that's the solution that we should run through or in education in order to make sure that, one, we make this transformation happening as quickly as possible, right? Improve how learning is done in public education, teaching and learning is done. But two, make sure that we do this in a responsible way for the long term. And that's where I think what we are experimenting with is moving away specifically for tech and tech implementation and tech purchasing from a software as a service model more to an innovation as a service model. And with that change of perspective, that model allows for basically certain agreements you make between that vendor and a public institution, between that private and public institutions, to safeguard public values on the long term. An example is no price jumps, right? There's no freedom on setting price, full freedom of setting prices, because the moment you have a vendor lock-in, you can just double, triple your price. Yeah, and there's no alternative for that institution. That hurts that institution, right? So it's making agreements on those lines, but we can think about a couple of more as well. And if you have then proper agreements, not too bureaucratic, not too hard to explain, but just straightforward and also clear on why they're there. So you set the rules of the game together as an industry. So with these public vendors and private vendors, but then use innovation as a service model and then try to run as fast as possible. Mm-hmm. That is at least what we are trying to do. And we have our first collaboration that is actually in practice, started the 1st of January 2024 in this mindset. And then this is where I get to how do you create change while you're not setting the rules. And that's true for me. I'm an entrepreneur, so I need to navigate within the rules. I don't set them. That means that the way that I see that change happening is when show success, right? The only thing that matters then, show success. Move quickly, show success. That was important for me to get that willing turbine teacher to adopt superfoods. I had to show her the success of the implementation, right? And that I think also that is important for this public-private partnerships. Let's make sure we make it extremely concrete and we show the success that comes from it. And if we do this well, that might be the shortcut to at least be back in the race. So that is something that I'm actively contributing to. By the way, this is also something that we do in full transparency, right? We try to publish everything we do and how we do it. And I work with a lot of EdTech companies, entrepreneurs, to inspire them on how I do this, and also with institutions, right? Public institutions, to inspire them how the model works, and not necessarily because the model itself is just a template how to do business. Others can also use this, right? And I try to create in an organic way and through basically building success, show them, hey, it can be done this way, and that can create traction. At least that is what I try to do. That's my role.
Yeah, fair enough. And so your story is extremely personal. You were inspired. You're passionate about the work that you're doing. What do you wish teachers knew about working with a company like yours? What do you wish educators and the system knew about working with a company like yours? What are you here to do for them?
We have a testimonials channel on Slack. Slack is our internal within the company, our communication platform. And there's basically a room where we talk about a specific topic. And one is that it's called testimonials. And those are testimonials of teachers that actually applied it in practice and how that changed their life, right? Because this industry is so hard for innovation to get through, these teachers need to work with extreme legacy technology and legacy solution. That means the good news is if you are able to bring in proper technology, the difference between what they use and what they get is huge. So they become extreme promoters. And that fires up this whole company, right? Every time that channel blinks, there's a new message. You have a video or of a testimonial of either a student or a teacher that actually has used it. And I think that is something we should be doing more. We should show success more and make it very easy to then copy success, right? And make that process significantly reduce the friction in that process, show success, show what works, make it easy for others to adopt. There's autonomy in education, so no one will just copy-paste, but at least copy and then adjust to what fits your vision, right? And then paste, and then go and work, and make significantly reduce that friction. Yeah, I think that's how we can create a flywheel of innovation.
Yeah, I like that. So just to repeat the steps for educators that might want to work with you or a company like yours, there are testimonials, there are others who have walked the path before they have to. And I think also having an open spirit, right? I had this conversation with another person a few days ago, which is basically, yes, if you're working with Microsoft and Google, yes, they are legacy companies. Yes, they've got billions of dollars, humongous teams. But when you're working with a smaller team or you're working with a company that's 5 to 10 years old, have different expectations. Realize you probably will have more deeper personal connection, which is incredible. And also be mindful that there might be hiccups. Would you venture to say that that's a fair comment on my part?
Oh, it's an interesting reflection. I think we should have grit for delivering excellence. So hiccups in education, that's a no-no. Because you have one teacher that needs to teach to 50 or 90 students at the same time in one cohort. If something goes wrong, their life is really terrible because their email boxes fail and they are only trying to work through that mistake. So I learned this the hard way, don't get me wrong. But I think we should create a standard that tech we use is at least bug-free.
100%.
And it's easier to do these days, luckily, than it was 10 years ago. So that's the good news.
I agree with you. And I'm not necessarily suggesting, hey, it's a free for all. But I do think that because the space is changing quite fastly, there is a need to adopt mindset. So essentially what I'm trying
that's nice. Yeah, I see that
where a school can also think more like a startup, right? Like making a mistake isn't the end of the world. It is an opportunity, however, to teach your students, hey, what happens when something goes wrong? Because quite frankly, problem solving and critical thinking are really important skills. I agree with you. Of course, you're never going to deliver something that's subpar just because whatever it's education or it's, like absolutely not. But I think more, what is the mindset required from an educational institution to work with an EdTech provider?
And what can you learn from it? Huh? Yeah, and I think that is correct. So that chemistry and learning from that culture is extremely, I think, satisfying for a lot of people. So that is one of the reasons why you should want to do this. Another reason is you can help create the technology to fit your values, right? You can make tech. If you're purchasing tech from a big company, you're truly being a consumer. But if you work with a startup or a scale up that definitely has innovation as a service as one of their value propositions, you're not just consuming a product, you co-create, right? You have influence on the end result. You can say, right, once that product actually has scale, you can say, you see that thing, that was my idea, right? That also gives a lot of gratification. And I think that this is just a cultural thing in general. What I see a lot in the system of education is, what if it goes wrong, right? But what if we do something and it goes wrong? But they never ever reflect on, what if we don't do anything and it goes wrong?
Yeah.
Right? Then the opportunity cost of doing nothing is huge, but no one talks about it. But that's a mindset for an entrepreneur: is you need to do something. If you don't do something, you're going to go bankrupt, right? So that's just a state of mind, and I think there's a lot to learn from.
I think as an entrepreneur, we also have like a high, I don't know, I don't want to speak for you, but I definitely have a bit of a high risk profile, probably also because I worked in countries like South Sudan and Angola. Like you need to have a bit of a risk appetite, but the beauty of it is I genuinely believe that when you have that open mindset and you're like, cool, we'll iterate. All right, we're going to fix it. No problem is that big that we can't fix it, or that we can't work on it and solve it together, reiterate. And that is actually this beautiful mindset that entrepreneurship can also bring to an education domain, which has been quite binary, quite rigid for a very, very long time. Ewoud, you have such a beautiful way of structuring your experience and your knowledge. And I really think that's, absolutely. I think this is very admirable, and it's going to be wonderful for our listeners. Is there anything else that you would like to share?
Yeah. There's one thing I like to share, especially also, I can't clone myself, but if I could, I would be in politics, and I would also be in leadership positions of these institutions, because I wanna from a citizen perspective, the European citizen perspective, valuing the European values and the Western values, you could say, or basically actually the humane values, humanity, please act. Because the cost for you of doing nothing is so big, you just don't pay it now, you pay it in the future. But you need to act now. Take that responsibility. Please do. Be a leader, and be a true leader. Just not be a what is the right word for that? But a bureaucrat or a director. No, we need leaders right now. Today we need leaders. It's not. We used to have to have people that would, lead an institution, a university, to make sure it doesn't change too much, right? To resist time. But now, to resist time, you need to change that attitude. And I think that culture shock is so big, that is hard, and that's why it requires leadership. So I call out to the leaders, and often they are not the one, maybe not even the one by title today, but it's a personality trait. Please step up, because we need you. I have a list of people that I know are like that, but I wish there were just 10 times more.
That's beautiful. I really appreciate that. And it also takes courage to say that and to call it out how it is. Thank you so much, Ewoud. It was awesome getting to know you this way. First of all, I know you and I should definitely spend a bit more time talking, not just talking, but doing and seeing what can be done in the landscape. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Really appreciated having you today and very much looking forward to connecting again in the near future. How can people, if at all, what is the best way for people to follow your work, to follow Feedback Fruits, or to get in touch with someone on your team or even yourself?
Very good question. LinkedIn. Go to LinkedIn, connect with me, follow me, follow Feedback Fruits. I think that's the way. Also, that's not LinkedIn, but if you want to understand a bit more work when it comes to this public-private partnerships, right? We try to establish in education. Go to trustframework.eu. There's more insights behind this vision, and it's relatively pragmatic.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, cool. We will definitely add those links as well. Really appreciate that. So LinkedIn and trustframework.eu. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ewoud.
Thank you. Pleasure was all mine.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Making Sense of AI. We hope you enjoyed listening and that it's given you valuable insights. A special thank you to Ewoud for sharing his insights and knowledge with us today. If you found today's discussion enlightening, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. This podcast was brought to you by Turner and Binova AI. To deploy AI at your business today, reach out now via the links in the description or directly on LinkedIn. Stay tuned for our next episode. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep on making sense of AI. Goodbye for now.